Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today with BattleBots over and BuggleBots coming up, and of course BattleBots is going to be on TV and then BuggleBots will be out on YouTube at some point. We haven't even filmed it yet, so I don't know when it's going to be out, but with all of that stuff happening, I figured it would be a good time to have a bit of a look at some of my old Beetle weights, because with all of this stuff going on, I'm sure that there are some of you out there who either want to build your first robot or want to take a leap into Beetles as your first attempt at Beetles. And as somebody who has built a couple of Beetles now, I think it is a good idea for me to show you some of the old Beetles that I have here, and let's pull them apart, have a look at some of the things that went kind of okay, and look at all of the things that went wrong, because across these two Beetles, there is a lot of not learning my lesson and a fair amount of mistakes that were made, and fixing all of those things ended up with Annie, which is, you know, my current competitive Beetle. So I feel like showing off these mistakes to you guys is probably a good start. So let's bring you guys in here and have a look at, not again, my drum spinner first. There's not a lot left of this guy. I've been stealing parts from him left, right, and center as I build other things. And then we're going to look at the toaster Beetle breakfast as well, because this guy is a little bit more together and you can see some of the mistakes a little bit more clearly in breakfast. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with not again, as I mentioned. Now this was my first ever real attempt at a Beetle, having done a lot of ant weight stuff, so 150 gram ant weight stuff. I then decided to try and tackle a Beetle because my club was building a Beetle weight arena to help us all tackle Beetles. Now, I knew that I was going to need strong supports for my weapon, so that's all HDPE. This black stuff is all HDPE, which is really good. The problem is that my design philosophy for this entire thing was, if I need something, I can 3D print it, which is bad. Do not 3D print components for Beetles, pretty much ever. Annie has one 3D printed part, or a couple of 3D printed parts, but out of rigid materials, Annie has one, and that is just a shroud to keep electronics out of the weapon motor. This guy had a bunch of 3D prints, including the base plate, which helps hold everything together, and then these guys up here, which were to hold the top armor on. Now this here is 2 mil thick printed PLA material, so this stuff just broke really, really easily. You can see that this is absolutely terrible. It was a really bad idea. And that needs to be a lot stronger because that is the piece that holds the top plate on. So if I get hit on the top, this is the thing that's actually taking all of that force. Now, this type of design problem is basically throughout this entire design. You can see down here, I had to chew some stuff away so that the motor would fit, but that meant that the actual connection between this black panel and the base plate is really small and really chewed out. If you can have a look down in there. Also, this bar was an afterthought. This was to keep the whole front section together during hits with the weapon, because the weapon would sit in here, and when it hit things, it would try and separate these two side walls. And in previous versions of this design, every time I hit something, the drum would just fall straight out. So I had to basically go back in and reinforce everything to make sure that the drum stayed together. And like I said, I 3D printed a whole bunch of stuff in here, including the actual drum mounts themselves, which was not a good idea. These things broke and broke often. So not only was the drum falling out because the side panels were coming undone, but also I was losing my weapon mounts, which held bearings and then bolted directly into the actual weapon, which was an egg beater like this. The egg beater weapon I would definitely do again for sure, but I would need a brand new version because the bolt holes in here are the wrong size and space, and these things would definitely need to be made out of a stronger material, probably aluminium, maybe even stronger than that, depending on how much weight I wanted to put into those things. Yeah, then also, the motors we'll talk about in a minute, because these things are tiny and they survived across into breakfast. One thing that also survived across into breakfast, which was a bad thing, was I did not think about how I was getting bolts in and out of this design. So you can see right down in the back here, there are 2 bolts right at the very bottom that have to go from the inside out to hold on to these rubber pieces at the back here, and the same on the other side. Right down in there, there should be 2 bolts. There's only one of those in at the moment. And I designed those in there thinking that was a really great idea, but of course, did not think about how I was ever going to get those in place. So these 4 bolts take half the time to get in that it takes to put this whole robot together, because you can get one of the bolts in pretty easily, but the other side bolt, the 2 bolts that are in at the moment over these sides, are incredibly difficult to get in because there is literally no space for any of the tools that I have to get in there and actually get those bolts in. So they basically have to be hand tweaked around with a pair of pliers or something similar to get those into place, which is bad. Really, really bad. The next problem here is this motor mount. So this motor mount is literally just a piece of ABS, I believe, 3D printed again, because like I said, the whole problem with this design is I thought that I could 3D print absolutely everything I needed to, and it is held in place with a pair of 4 plastic screws that just screw themselves or tap themselves into the PLA base plate, which is not a good idea either. These things came loose in pretty much every fight, and yeah, I had a bad time, basically. Alright, so that's this guy. The rules here are don't 3D print main structural components, especially not out of PLA. Make sure you give yourself enough room to get into all of the bolt locations and everything. And yeah, don't use self-tapping plastic screws to hold your actual drive motors down. That was a really, really bad idea. All right, so that was that guy. Let's move on to breakfast. Now, breakfast is in a little bit of a state right now because I haven't really done anything with it since it got destroyed in a competition. But that's okay. We're going to have a look at breakfast right now. So in underneath here you can see some of the main damage. The toaster shell cracked along one plane, and it cracked just at one of the 4 bolts that held it into place. So you can actually see that there's still a fair amount of plastic there holding the rest of this base to the chassis itself. There's also a googly eye down here, which was done because breakfast was designed poorly and the wheels were way too far back with a massive blade at the front, which means that all of the weight is right up the front here. So the wheels couldn't get any traction at all. So that's another thing you need to be very aware of, is that the more weight you put further away from your drive wheels, the less grip you're going to get with your drive wheels. So you need to make sure that if you've got a massive weapon, that everything else sits over top of your drive wheels right at the back or wherever your drive wheels are, so that you've got weight on those drive wheels and you get traction out of those drive wheels, because otherwise you ain't going nowhere. All right, let me flick this guy over and I'm gonna take these bolts out and then pop out the main chassis, and you can have a look at how we changed some of the design thinking from the last version, or from Not Again, into breakfast. Okay, so here is the main chassis of breakfast, removed from the toaster shell that it resided in. Now, this guy, there are a lot of issues with as well. There is a lot less 3D printed parts in here. Most of the 3D printed parts are on the weapon pulleys and the weapon belt. All of this, it worked okay, but I would never ever do this again anyway, or at least not in these materials. This is PLA printed pulleys, which I've been having ABS printed pulleys melt in Annie Are You OK, so I would never make PLA printed pulleys ever again. Having said that, that is the only 3D printed parts in here that are critical. There's one little standoff in here, which is literally just to help these 3 bolts be long enough, or to be short enough, I guess, to go into here. They're basically just a standoff to take up a little bit of extra space off of these bolts. But the rest of it is not too bad. It is made out of 6mm thick HDPE, which is pretty good. The problem here though is, once again, I did not take into account how to get tools into all of the places that needed things. So all of this is held together with 1mm thick aluminium angle, and all of it is through bolted, which means a bolt goes through the HDPE and the aluminium angle, and then a nut goes in on the other side, which is great for 3 out of the 4 sides. But then when you go to put on the 4th side, you're trying to get Allen keys and or pliers or wrenches or whatever inside the thing to hold the nut in place as you screw things down. So that didn't actually work all that well. Like I said, for 3 out of 4 sides, it works great. You can put everything together really nicely, but then trying to get the 4th side on, and you end up with difficulties. So when you're doing your design, put extra effort into where your bolts go and how they bolt down, and make sure that you're going to be able to put things together with just a screwdriver for the final panel. That's all you really want on the final panel, is just a single thing in here that you can screw straight down into. For that, there are 2 things I can recommend: nut certs and nut rivets. So nut certs are these little guys down in here, and I'm not sure how well these are going to pick up on camera, but those are little brass heat threaded inserts that can be heated up and pushed into plastic to give a thread inside a piece of plastic. Those are really good. And I don't have any in here, but nut rivets are things that that are basically a rivet that go through sheet metal and give you a nice long thread through the sheet metal, which is really cool. Yeah, so don't do what I've done here and make it really, really hard for yourself to get in and out. Also, while these aluminium angles here are a lot better than the 3D printed angles I used in Not Again over there, these are still not thick enough. In Annie, Are You Okay? Everything is 2 or 3mm thick to hold all of the panels together, because these 1mm thick ones bent and warped, especially when I got hit, and I got hit once or twice, and then basically the whole chassis twisted, and it was just all over from there. The final thing I want to talk about is the drive system and the drive motors that I'm using. So these drive motors here are, I think they're a 16mm drive motor, and they're basically, these ones at least, are like a Silver Spark or a Gold Spark knockoff direct from China, and you don't want to use these. Even the Silver Spark and the Gold Spark, you don't want to use these. And you can see this one, the output shaft is all wobbly and all bent up, and that is because these motors, the gears inside of them cannot take the forces that a Beetle weight can put out. So these things break really easily and are very much not recommended for this weight class. Everybody I've ever seen use these has broken at least one per fight when they're fighting them in a Beetle weight. So if you're running a 4-wheel drive, you might be able to get away with them, but make sure you bring in spares, because you're going to be breaking them constantly. So the thing that a lot of people do use, and what I'm currently using in Annie, Are You Okay? Is these guys. These are 24mm motors from memory and 1000 RPM. So this is pretty standard in the Beetle weight class. So if you're looking for a motor for your Beetle weight, go for a 24mm 1000 RPM drive motor, just like this guy, and that will work good for you. The final thing here is this system that I've got in place here to hold these drive motors in does work, but does not work the way I've done it. So this is a HDPE plate with a hole cut in it that the motor can slide through, and then there is a plate on the outside, which is where the motor actually gets screwed in. The problem is that I use really thin plastic to mount my motor and not some form of metal. When you do this type of system, the plate that you are mounting the motor to needs to be stronger than the material that you are cutting your way through. Otherwise, you might as well just mount directly to the material that you cut through. And that was the big mistake that I made here. These drive mountings were ridiculous, basically. They were not strong enough in any way, shape, or form, so in one hit, they just exploded. And this side here, as you can see, there's only a tiny little piece of plastic left on there because it just, in one hit. There was also no shock mounting in any of this stuff. In Annie, Are You Okay? I built the shock mounting into the wheels. They are rubberized wheels so that when Annie bounces around, the wheels actually take up some of that shock load. In this guy, I literally had hard PLA wheels with a very thin run of silicone around the outside, so there was no shock mounting in any of this at all. Basically, as soon as something hit the wheels or the robot was pushed or just slammed into a wall, all of that shock load went straight into the gearboxes. And as I said, these gearboxes can't take that kind of shock load, which is why this is all wobbly and messed up. Yeah, so I think that is that for looking at these past two Beetle weights and trying to give you some ideas of the types of things that I've changed and improved in my Beetle weight building. I have definitely learned a lot from building these two Beetle weights and now building Annie, Are You Okay? I would actually like to go back and rebuild both of these at some point. Knowing what I know now, I think I could do a much better job of both of them. But we'll see how we go. I'm taking Annie, of course, over to Bugglebots, and I've really only got space in, well, my life for one Beetle weight. So we'll see how Annie goes, and then maybe when we decide to move on from Annie, we might go back to one of these two guys. Or we'll build something new. I don't know. But what I do know is that if whatever Beetle comes next is going to avoid the pitfalls that both of these Beetle weights had in them. Yeah, okay. So there you have it. That is the kind of overview of my past two Beetles, and hopefully you guys learned a little bit along the way. Like I said, I learned a lot building these two Beetles, and yeah, the stuff that I've learned I fixed going in and building Annie. So if you guys can skip the first two and go straight to something like Annie, that would be awesome. Hopefully you guys can do that. Like I said, be really, really cautious of how you join your panels together. Make sure those panels are strong enough. Make sure you have room to get to all of your nuts and bolts easily, and your top panel is easy to get on and off. Mostly, you should just be aiming to do it with a single screwdriver straight into something. Don't tap plastic though. Put in nutserts or any other type of nut insert that goes into plastic. Don't tap plastic. It's just not going to work. It basically doesn't. And use good drive motors. Use these 24mm. I'm pretty sure they're 24mm. I'll make sure I leave it in the description down below what the actual outside diameter of that is, but I'm pretty sure it's 24mm. Use these. Use 1000 RPM versions of those. That will save you a lot of time, stress, and headaches going in and doing a Beetle. Yeah, so there you go. Hope you guys learned something, and I will see you in the next video.